Remnant Seventh-day Adventist Church. That's quite a bold statement. In a world that seems to be steeped in emerging church philosophy, that's sticking your neck out. I'm proud of you. Thank you. I have a title there, but I'm not going to stick strictly to script because I believe the time is short. Can we talk?
Yes.
If you really belong to a remnant Seventh-day Adventist church, that means you represent a particular philosophy that is to call the entire world into a new paradigm, a new way of thinking. And it is a privilege and an honor to do this. And I believe that God is in the movement to call us into a new way of thinking. They gave me buttons to push, but they sometimes work. When the children of Israel were called out of Egypt, they were not only called out of slavery, literally, but spiritually as well. And God wanted to transform them and change them into something which they vehemently resisted. And they are an example to us. They murmured against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And they moaned about the flesh pots where they had been. And oh, those leeks and those onions and those wonderful things that they ate before. Now, I was an Egyptian. But we have to wrestle that weaver's beam from the hand of the Egyptian and kill him. Because if he doesn't get killed, he's going to kill you. He's going to kill you. I don't know how many animal products I consumed in my life. It is incomputable. But one thing is for sure, it must run into thousands of chickens because my wife made two, one for the family, one for me. I ate the whole thing by myself. And chicken in my lifestyle was considered a vegetable. Now, I could give you a long scientific lecture as to why we shouldn't do this or that or the other. They're all on DVD, and you can see them if you want to. But we will talk about those issues. A little bit here and a little bit there, and there are other speakers as well. And I went unto an angel and said to him, give me the little book. And he said unto me, take it and eat it up, and it shall make thy belly bitter, but it shall be in thy mouth sweet as honey. We've been, as a people, through that experience. We'll talk about that in the coming lectures. Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that believeth on me has everlasting life. I am the bread of life. Your fathers ate the manna. But we have the privilege to eat the real thing, to internalize the Word of God. And that means to experience a transformation. Because God has a plan with every single one of us. And I want to talk about that spiritual plan today and look at the other aspects as well as we go along. Where did we come from as a human race? Where are we? And where are we going? There's nobody on the planet that teaches this except you. That's special, don't you think? And what grace to be called into this movement to present God's cause in a world that's literally dying in front of our eyes. I think we are on the threshold. No, I am convinced we are on the threshold of the final events on this planet. And the time to beat about the bush is over. It's over. Jesus said unto them, I say unto you, except you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. I'm always so surprised when people like to use the lifestyle of Jesus to justify their present lifestyle. And we must talk about that as well. So we have to eat manna until we come to Canaan. We need to have our pride humbled and laid into the dust, and we need to hunger and thirst for righteousness. And we need to set an example to the world that we really believe what the scriptures say. Didn't you say this morning? Substance of things hoped for. Evidence of things not seen. That city up there has to be such a reality that you can touch it. And he humbled thee and suffered thee to hunger and fed thee with manna. And they grumbled, and he chastened them. We fed you in the wilderness with manna, which thy fathers knew not, that he might humble thee, and that he might prove thee and do thee good at thy latter end. So he changed their lifestyle for their own good. Now we are surprised when God, in the great final gathering of God's people, does the same thing. And we have people who just don't get it. They don't understand. Thou gavest thy good spirit to instruct them, withheldest not thy manna from their mouth. Thou gavest them water for the thirst. It rained all these things from heaven. He gave them all the evidence they needed. And yet they rebelled. Fortunately, we are not of that ilk. We wouldn't do something like that, would we? The Bible says in 1 Corinthians 6:13, meats for the belly and belly for the meats. Food for the belly. In that sense, it's not flesh, it's general food. Food is for the belly and belly is for the food. But God shall destroy both it and them. Now the body is not for fornication, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. You see, it was an Epicurean dictum that it didn't matter what you put into your mouth. That didn't matter. After all, it was purged and then it was gone. But Paul says it does matter what you put into your mouth. Whose end is destruction, whose God is their belly, and whose glory is in their shame, whose mind earthly things. And then we read in Numbers 11 the story about the mixed multitude. Now, it'd been through the initial process. God had permitted them to, keep some of their lifestyle. And then when he withdrew it, eventually, they grumbled more and more and more. And the mixed minority was the problem. Does it say that? No, it says the mixed multitude. That sounds kind of big. So who's the mixed multitude? I am the mixed multitude. I am the mixed multitude. Didn't I come out of the world? Was I an Israelite before I became part of spiritual Israel? No, I was mixed multitude. Did I have an attitude when it came to food? Absolutely. Absolutely. What is this toxic waste you're trying to feed me here? I had an attitude. And the amazing thing is, in my own personal experience, I can only speak from personal experience. I'm not a standard for anyone. The Bible, spirit of prophecy, that's the standard. And so let's look at that. My wife and I were baptized into this church. I don't know what it was with them. Maybe they were careful. They didn't tell us anything. I knew nothing about the spirit of prophecy when I was baptized. Did you know that? Nobody told me a word. They'd brought me creation evolution books. I'd looked at them and I said, what rubbish! So they didn't bring me any other books after that. And here one morning, we were already baptized, Seventh-day Adventist. We had friends over and guests, and we had a big meal, our normal meal, which consisted of all these corpses. And the next morning, the remnants of the corpses were lying around, the bones. And the strangest thing happened. It had never happened before. Both my wife and I, at exactly the same time, when we cleared up the next morning, had this overwhelming impression that this was not right. But I couldn't tell you why. I couldn't tell you why. And then a strange thing happened. A colleague of mine from the university phoned me. And he lambasted me. And he said, you joined that sect? And then he said, you have lost your mind. Don't you know that they have? And then he gave a number of explicits, which I do not wish to repeat. That woman, that kleptomaniac, explicit, Ellen G. White. I'd never heard of her. I didn't know what he was talking about. But he piqued my interest. And you know, God works in mysterious ways. Because he said it that way, I was interested. If they hate it that much, it must be important. And God in his mercy, because we were far away from everything, I'd sold my house, I'd left my job because I wanted to get away from teaching a lie. I refused to teach on evolution at my university. And so I had resigned, not knowing what would happen to me. And a colporteur came by, and he brought us some books. And the first one I picked up was called Desire of Ages. And my wife picked up, what was your first one? Ministry of Healing. God has a sense of humor. And I read Desire of Ages, and I guess I needed that one because I was so inspired. And the Word of God just jumped off the page. And she read Ministry of Healing, which was, in the end, a somewhat culinary experience, but, well, okay. And as I read more and more and more, I realized what a wonderful gift we have as a church. To make a long story short, eventually I was reappointed at the university, not that university, but another one, the University of the Struggle, the post-apartheid university. And I started getting involved in my research again, but I had to change my mind. I had to make a 180-degree turn. Here's where I was, and now I had to do something else. And I decided, as a physiologist, that I was going to do physiological research on the question animal protein versus plant protein. Almost impossible to get funding from the government for something like that. I put in my description of what I was going to do. I described the experimentation. They wrote back to me and said, no funding because there's no difference between animal protein and plant protein. Protein is protein. No money. But there were a bunch of scientists from the agricultural sector that were struggling with something which was called skew leg syndrome. Sheep developed skew legs when they were fed in stalls on particular diets. And I was listening to one of them speaking, and I spoke to him afterwards, and I said, the problem is you're using animal protein in your feed, and that's causing the problem. The author thought I was crazy. And so he decided, together with me, to launch an experiment. I got some money from the university. We did the experiment, and lo and behold, after feeding the animals animal protein versus plant protein, they developed skew limb syndrome if they had the animal protein. And so we started analyzing why. And the conclusion was that the animal protein is much higher in sulfur-containing amino acids. And if you force an animal to metabolize that, they have to convert the amino acid to a carbohydrate for energy. They split out that sulfur, and it ends up in the body as sulfate, which is sulfuric acid. And immediately your body has to neutralize that, and the only path that your body recognizes, you can eat alkaline things until you're blue in the face. There's only one mechanism that all animals use to solve that problem, and that is a hormone cascade via parathyroid hormone that pumps calcium carbonate out of the bones into the blood to neutralize the acid. Skew. Now that's fascinating. And in the spirit of prophecy, we read that animal products are not as good for us as we think, right? We should move to plant proteins. And so I started going through the spirit of prophecy, and I made a list of everything that she said that tickled my mind. And I read, and I read, and I read, and I had a long, long list. Things like milk and sugar, not a good combination. I'd go to the literature and I'd search. Where's the answer to this problem? Why is it not a good combination? Try and tell the world it's not a good combination. Try and tell the chocolate companies it's not a good combination. What will they tell you? Rubbish. Good word. Thank you. They put it onto the lifeboats because it's a high-energy food, and it'll give you the energy and the go that you need to stay alive when you're adrift out there on the ocean, right? I told you I'm going to move off the script, but bear with me. And I started designing experiments on this issue. And eventually, we had so many experiments going and so many results coming in that the scientific world started to take note. And that's when the Royal Society in London, that was giving a lot of money for the reconstruction and development of a very skew political and educational system in my country, decided to give money to certain people to run projects and educate people. And one of my students actually was one of only 50 students in the world that received a Harvard postdoc on the strength of the dairy research we did. So the Lord was good. He was good. But what was my secret weapon that nobody knew about? My secret weapon was the spirit of prophecy. And eventually I would tell the students, I want you to compare this. She says, for example, 3 grains are better than 1. Analyze the amino acid distribution in 3 grains, and you will find you get a complete protein. Take 1 away and you have an incomplete protein. That's fascinating stuff. Talk about combinations and stuff like this. I mean, it's brilliant. I would tell my students, when you do the experiments, you will find this one is the best, that one's the second best, and that one is the very worst. And of course, the very worst was the one they wanted to be the very best, because that's how they lived. Eventually, they said, the man's a prophet. He's got it right every single time. Now, of course, I knew I wasn't a prophet. But I knew also I had consulted one. So God, in His grace, helped me with that research. I'll tell you one little story. I was working on the milk and sugar issue, and I was looking for publications. Because whenever you apply for money for research for anything, you have to have some backing. Somebody who has worked in similar lines, and you say, I want to expand on this because of this, and the other. And I couldn't find anything. And so I sat in my office and I said a little prayer. And I said, God, I cannot find anything on milk and sugar combination that it is bad. Because every publication will tell you milk is good, and sugar in moderation, that's energy. Too much sugar, there's enough on that. But the combination milk and sugar, nobody argues about that. I mean, every drink that people drink in the evenings to go to sleep better is a milk and sugar combination. Isn't that? A little milk with a little honey, or a little Ovaltine, or a little Horlicks, or a little this, or a little that. It's milk and sugar, isn't it? And I prayed. I said, Lord, help me to find some information on this. I want to pursue this issue. And then I went and I gave my class, and I did what I have to do, and I waited for my next class, which was my senior students. And the phone rang. And it was the physiology professor in another department. At that stage, I was in zoology. And he said to me, I have a serious problem. I just sent my students out of the class, and I clean forgot to tell them we have a visiting scientist from the Tygerberg Hospital Health Center. And I forgot to tell them, and now this man is coming and he doesn't have an audience. But I know that you have students now. Couldn't you bring your students over that I don't look like an idiot without an audience? Do me this favor, please. And I was angry. I thought to myself, I don't have time to give up my class now. We're behind already in our schedule. This man is bugging me. But I'm such a decent fellow, I said. Hypocrite. Sure, I'll do it for you. I'll do anything. So I went to my next class and I said, students, today we're not having class. We're going over to there and we're going to listen to a lecture. And I was grumpy. And I took the students. And the man got up, and he was this scientist, and he said, today I'm going to talk about something different. I was recently contacted by a major chocolate company who wanted me to prove that their product is superbly healthy. And as a scientist, I sat down and I thought to myself, well, what does it consist of? It consists of cocoa, and then it has milk, and then it has sugar. I fell off my chair. I had to get back up. My ears were bigger than they are, and that's horrendous. And I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And he said, so I started the experimentation by asking for student volunteers for money. You get them very readily on that basis. And I'd hook them up to all the equipment and take blood samples regularly. And then I would give one group of students a glass of water with the equivalent amount of sugar to drink that you have in a bar of chocolate. The other group, I gave a glass of milk equivalent in size to what you get in a regular bar of chocolate. And to the next group, I gave the combination, milk and sugar. And I think he had the third group where he gave the combination, the milk, the sugar, and the cocoa. And then he compared them. And then he said, when I gave them the sugar alone, these were the parameters, the blood pressures, the this, the that, and the other, and the triglyceride levels and the cholesterol levels and the this over a period of time. And as I gave them the sugar, it would go up. It would stay there for an hour or two and come down and go down. And I was surprised, he said, that the sugar would take up the triglycerides. That's the fat in the blood. Why would the sugar do that? Was it protecting the cells from a sugar surge or something like that? So that's an interesting point to ponder. He said, and then I gave them the milk, and the same happened. Of course, I expected there that the triglycerides would go up, and they did, and that the cholesterol would go up, and it did, because milk contains oxidized cholesterol, the very worst kind, and it did. And then it came down, and it normalized after 2 or 3 hours. He said, and then I gave them the combination. He said, what a disaster. It not only went up double, but it refused to come down. And it stayed there for hours and hours, sometimes up to 10 hours, before it normalized. He said the very worst thing you could take at night is the combination milk of sugar, because that's why people die of heart attacks at night. Because that combination makes the blood sluggish, clogs the system. And I take that and I think to myself, isn't this amazing? And here was this lady all these years ago, and she wrote it before there was a monitor to measure what happens to your triglycerides or your cholesterol or your whatever. So don't underestimate the spirit of prophecy. Have I got more slides here? I think so. Hundreds of them. So here they were, grumbling about the manna. Then Moses heard the people weep throughout their families, every man in the door of his tent. And they were highly upset because they craved flesh food. Did you know that it's addictive? It's a craving. It's like a drug. And you have to get it out of your system. You have to get it out of your system. When I stopped smoking, I dreamt for 3 years that I was smoking. I had to get it out of my system. I was not an Adventist when I gave it up. I did it with willpower. I'm a German. But meat, whew, that was a different story. And say unto the people, sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow. The Lord is going to do this thing, and he brought the quails. I'm not going to put the verses up. You know them. And the people died, and they called it graves of longing. They desired it. Now here's a typology. God had borne with their weakness until he had given them something better, but they rebelled, didn't they? And the second time, he said, all right, you crave this? I'll give it to you. I'll give it to you until it comes out of your ears. And then, while it was still between their teeth, the plague hit them. They hadn't even swallowed it yet. So here's a typology. When God takes us out of Egypt, he wants to retrain us to go back to Canaan. What was it like in Canaan? I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree with fruit in it, and it shall be yours for food. That was the original diet. What is the future diet going to be like? You can read it in Isaiah. The same thing. And the lion will eat what like the ox? Does that mean the lion will become a vegetarian? Yes, it means the lion will become a vegetarian. Now, that tickled me too. So we did quite a lot of research on plant protein versus animal protein, changes in anatomy, and we found that in a 6-week developmental period, the whole anatomy of the intestinal arrangement can change in an animal in 6 weeks, based on what protein you put in the diet. Now, I have a whole lecture on that, and I'm not doing that lecture. I want to talk about the typologies. First time I had soy milk, I thought I was eating broken glass. You get some recipes out there, for lack of a better word, are horrendous. But you do get some that are actually quite good, don't you? So why choose a bad one just because you want to be a saint? This is what the world finds. Study shows how meat spurs cancer growth. I'm not going to go into these details. I just want to show you that even the world is up to speed. Not as speedy as this thing, but never mind. And the author there is a very prominent person in health circles. She writes many articles. She's on many boards and clinic boards. Coffee, rich in unhealthful foods. We're without excuse. These things are unhealthy. It goes further. These are issues that can tear us apart. Did you know that? It's tearing our church apart. We have whole churches, in Europe particularly, after church it's coffee time. You go and drink coffee. Strong filter coffee, the real thing. Not grain coffee, that's for sissies. And everybody thinks that's fine. But the spirit of prophecy says it's sin. Why? Number one, it's addictive. It's just like a drug. Number two, if you get caffeine or theobromine, which is in cocoa, into your system, the first thing your body does, it releases cortisol. It's the fight and flight mechanism of coping with stressful situations. You're going to fight or you're going to run. But you're sitting in front of television or at your desk and you're putting that stuff in your body, right? You're not going to fight, you're not going to run, but your body releases cortisone. Cortisone tells your liver, pump glycogen as glucose into the blood because this guy's going to run like crazy. And there you get your glucose spike. plus all the psychological issues that go together with adrenaline and cortisone and all of those issues. You know, if you're going to run from an enemy, sometimes you don't think straight. Sometimes you're even incontinent. So if you can't even control what's below, how are you going to control what's up there? And this glucose goes into the blood, and the body says, this man's not running, or this lady. I better solve the problem. Pump some insulin in there. Down it comes. And you're dejected and brain dead for a while. And then you have to give the reason for the hope within you. Excuse me. And what's the solution? Let's put ourselves through the same trauma a second time, and a third time, and a fourth. Thing about Nobel laureates that talk about this research. So there's nothing wrong with soya. Isn't it fascinating that when they exported things to China from the United States of America, whatever, steel, the ships went over there, and then the ships came back empty, and they rode too high in the waves and the water, and it was dangerous, and the ships were unstable, so they had to put ballast on the boats in order to give them some weight. And what did they get from China in return for their industrial wares? Soybeans. So they pumped the holds full of soybeans, and that's how the soybean came to the United States of America. As one of my colleagues who comes from the East says, Lord, very clever. He has ways and means of introducing something that nobody wants. In a short time, it will not be safe to use anything that comes from the animal creation. I really believe, brothers and sisters, we are there. I really believe it. Not only from my scientific research, but I've come to trust the spirit of prophecy. Today, there's a tendency amongst us to marginalize it, to make it of non-effect, not to take it away, because after all, it is a fundamental belief that would be embarrassing. Leave it there, but let's make it of non-effect. Let's say we cannot use it for exegesis. We can use it for homiletics, maybe. That means, use it like you would comfort somebody with it. But to say that she actually means that which she says over there with the exact same authority as the prophets of old spoke, that would be discomforting to some. Have you ever read The Great Controversy? And when it says there in The Great Controversy, the beast out of the sea is, the beast out of the earth is, the image of the beast is that exegesis? Yes or no? Is that telling us what the text is trying to tell us? Then that's exegesis, right? And if we give up that exegesis, well, then we might as well throw it all overboard and just use it as a devotional. But I found in my research that when I looked up these funny little quotes and put them to the test in the laboratory, she wasn't 50% right, nor 60, nor 90. It was spot on every time. I think spiritually, I would be able to say exactly the same thing. And then what about herself? Too bio. You cannot live too plainly when you are studying so constantly. Your father and I have dropped milk, cream, butter, sugar, and meat entirely since we came to California. We are far clearer in mind and far better in body We live very plainly. We cannot write unless we do live simply. So she practiced what she preached. She didn't only speak for the future, she started implementing it. What about us? When are we going to wake up? When we read of the dangers and the encephalitises that are coming? Ask yourself a question. Why would a nation destroy every chicken in its midst? Why would Hong Kong do something like that? Public reason? It was a precautionary measure. A precautionary measure to go and kill 1 billion chickens. If they cost $5 each, that's $5 billion that you're throwing away as a precautionary measure. Why would a country like Malaysia go and slaughter every pig? A precautionary measure. Why did they do that? Traveling in South Africa, I'm going from one, you would probably call it state, to another, county to another. Get stopped by the police. Roadblocks in the middle of nowhere, nothing around. I'm in the middle of a desert, roadblock. Roll down the window. I thought they wanted to know, where's my driver's license? I'm ready to take it out. No, he doesn't want my driver's license. Can we look in your car, sir? Oh, he's looking for contraband. He's looking for drugs. He's looking for AK-47s. Goes through the trunk. I said, you find it? Nope. I said, what are you looking for? He says, meat. What kind of meat you looking for? Oh, it doesn't really matter. No, I'm interested. What kind of meat you looking for? I was looking for pork. Pork? Do you drive around the desert with pork in your car? And they put up roadblocks for that? And then on our farm, where we live, out in the middle of nowhere, suddenly they closed the roads. I said, excuse me, what are we going to do here now? It's ostrich country. They closed the roads. And I spoke to the policemen. They were sitting out there. It was the middle of winter. It was cold. And they were cold. They were freezing. So I went to the police and I said to them, you guys are freezing out here. And you're sleeping out there in this little caravan. That's not warm enough for you. Come and stay in my house. And then you take turns. You go to your caravan and stop whoever's coming along. What are you looking for? Ostriches. You see, they banned the sale of ostriches because of bird flu, right? And the farmers, well, that's a huge financial loss. So they would sneak the ostriches from the conservatory areas and sneak them via the back roads to some of the slaughterhouses that were still doing their things. And so they put up roadblocks. Now, why the pork? What was the problem with pork? There was nothing in the newspaper. It was encephalitis, the same that happened in Malaysia. An encephalitis virus. So you end up a cabbage for the rest of your life from eating a piece of meat. Whether it was clean meat, unclean meat, it didn't make a difference. You could end up that way from bovine spongiform-encephalitis, couldn't you? Disease is increasing. We live plainly. We cannot write unless we do it. Brothers and sisters, this is a spiritual war. Now, how much longer do I have? Eh? Mine says 17 minutes past. Do I have another 10 minutes? All right. I just want to address, I'm not going to put all the things. We're just going to talk, right? We said we're going to talk. Jesus ate fish. He did, eh? Yeah, ate fish. He must have eaten some sheep. Didn't he eat Passover lamb? Do you know what? Even in his resurrected body, he ate fish. Give me a piece. I'll show you I'm real. Did he do that? So if he ate it, it's good enough for me. Have you heard that? On more than one occasion, right? Okay. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and you say he has a demon. When you went out into the wilderness, you saw, what did you see? A reed shaking in the wind? Or did you go and see a prophet? I want to tell you, you went to see more than a prophet. Because never was there one greater than John. And John the Baptist came not eating and drinking. Does the Bible say that? So here were two contemporaries. The one was eating and drinking, and the other one was not eating and drinking. And Jesus said, there isn't a greater prophet than that, more than a prophet. They asked Ellen White, are you a prophet? She didn't want to say. Later she says, my work embraces that of a prophet, but it is much more than a prophet. Okay. Now, why did Jesus do what he did? Because Jesus came to meet the people where they were. But he never, ever left mankind without the witness they need. If you go through the typologies, he took them out of Egypt, he put them on another diet, they rebelled. But typologically, he showed them what he really wanted. Whether they did that further later in their life is not the issue. Typologically, he showed them where he was going. Daniel serves as a type of God's people. Daniel, judgment, people of judgment. The time of his judgment has come. Who says that? We say that, don't we? We say that. Typologically, as representing the remnant amongst Babylon. What diet was he on? He ate pulse. John the Baptist came not eating and drinking. He was a type of the antitypical Elijah who was to come and set the record straight. Is that correct? What was his diet? Locust and wild honey. Now, I have the quote here somewhere in this presentation. You'll just have to take my word for it. I can look for it. I don't know if I'll find it. Did you know meat eating is dishonoring to God? That's a powerful statement. It must fly in the face of many a minister in our illustrious circles. Move. I'm going to try and get that quote quickly. Must be here somewhere. Let not any of our ministers set an evil example in the eating of flesh meat. And do you know all of this? I warned you, I will not set an example now by eating fish. He has always left a witness. But thank God he was so gracious, he came all the way down to meet us where we were. And at that stage, it was not yet an issue. They were only eating clean food. They weren't eating unclean food. How do I know that? Peter says, "Not so, my Lord. I have never eaten anything impure or unclean in all my life." And that was after the resurrection. We must look at the full package. God is leading a people back to the original. Are we that people, or do we wait for someone else? Seventh-day Adventists, let's make a complete consecration to God. Not because we have to, but because we want to. Because otherwise you might as well leave it. It's of no value to you if you're doing it because it's being shoved down your throat. But once you start understanding the mindset of God, and once you see what He really wants for you, and once He has retrained your palate, you will say, "Thank you, Lord. I was in darkness, and you have brought me into your beautiful light." May God bless you as you make a serious issue of the times we live in. Amen.